Welcome to the Association of Christian Teachers podcast. And as usual, I'm Lizzie. And in our episode today, we're going to be exploring what it means to teach as a Christian in Wales and think about some of the distinctive features of Welsh education. As you'll know, education is a devolved matter. And as we discovered in our podcast about teaching in Scotland, has very different objectives and different cultures depending on which part of the UK you are in. We're joined by Geoff Cresswell today to discuss what's going on in Wales, to think about the curriculum for Wales, how it's shaping teaching and learning, the opportunities and challenges facing Christian teachers, and how a Christian vision of education speaks into the context today. So welcome, Geoff. It's lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
Geoff, could you tell us a little bit about your sort of career, your work in education? Because you've been at it a while and you've not only been a teacher, a head teacher, also an inspector. We'd love to know a little bit more about your kind of experience in the world of education in Wales.
Yes, of course. Yes, I've been teaching in Wales. I taught for about 40 years in Wales. I started off in school in Cardiff and Newport. I've been a head in 4 different schools in Cardiff. And then since then, I've retired, but spent the last few years working, coaching and mentoring head teachers all over Wales, basically. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So for those of us who aren't familiar with it, and it might be hard to answer this coming from an insider's perspective, but what do you think makes education in Wales distinct from the rest of the UK? Is there anything in particular?
There are a lot of differences, actually, and some of them are because of the history of Wales, and some are the opportunities that the devolved government has taken to make things different. There are no multi-academy trusts in Wales, no grammar schools. Everything is run by local authorities. There are independent schools, but far less than
And I
in
noticed
England.
many of them, some of them are closing as well. I noticed there was one, I think, in Ruthin that closed last week. Just a little segue there. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah, I
keep
think
going.
that's that put on independence.
Yeah.
That affects schools wherever you are. So the school setup is very different. The local authorities run the schools universally, with the Welsh government over the top of that. And so there are no SATs for primary school children. That's made a big difference. And the curriculum for Wales, which has been devised over the last few years, having researched a lot all over the world, really, looking a lot at countries like Finland that have seem to do well in education, is quite different to the curriculum in England.
Okay, so yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about that because obviously in England, particularly since the sort of Gove reforms, which depending on what type of educationalist you're speaking to, were either absolute poison or absolute genius, and many sit somewhere in the middle. England has a very knowledge-rich curriculum that is tested regularly, and obviously a lot is lying on the outcomes of things like SATs and then of course GCSEs. So what would you say then? What makes it good? What are the sort of positive points? And then what perhaps where do you think it could be lacking? Because I'm sure I could certainly say where I think the curriculum in England is lacking, but also some of its positive points.
Yeah, I think certainly in the primary sector, I think most heads or primary school teachers would be very positive with the curriculum for Wales. It's got 4 purposes that drive it, and the purposes over form a filter over everything that happens within the curriculum, and they really do. So it's got ambitious learners, ethical citizens, healthy individuals, and enterprising contributors.
Okay, yeah.
And
Sorry. No, I was going to say I'd been reading about this, and I don't think anyone could particularly disagree with any of those aims to develop people to be ambitious learners and ethical citizens, etc., etc. I'd love to know, yeah, what that looks like in practice and how those things are assessed.
It's assessment is not driving the curriculum.
Sure.
And that's a big difference. I don't know about England. I can't talk to England now. But certainly assessment doesn't drive the curriculum in Wales. Assessment for learning is actually what's working. I'm talking mostly of the primary sector now. I'll
Sure.
talk about the secondary sector in a minute, but the challenges are different there.
Okay, because you've worked in primary education your whole career, haven't you? That's your kind of area.
Yes,
Yeah.
I work with secondary heads now.
Okay.
I'm involved with quite a few of them, so I've got I know secondhand from them the
Mhm.
challenges they face. But yes, anyway, the way it works is a skill-based curriculum. It's
Okay.
not a
Yeah.
knowledge-based curriculum. So it's very much focused on, yes, establish progressive skills in literacy, numeracy, digital skills, teach those well, but teach them in authentic contexts where children are applying these skills in ways that they can develop as ethical citizens, ambitious learners. In the best schools, it means a lot to the pupils when they're doing things. They're not
Mhm.
just learning these skills in isolation, and they're not just learning knowledge. The knowledge aspect is the context by which they use their skills and develop their understanding. So it doesn't matter whether you choose the Romans in a school or whether you choose the Tudors. The knowledge that you gain in that, they will gain knowledge, but that's not what you're aiming for.
Sure.
You're aiming for a skill to be applied, used well. And in terms of the knowledge or the context that you do that in, it's very much you start with your own school, in your community, in your locality, and the
Mhm.
curriculum is geared to you start there with what the children know. You build their identity in their community, the school's identity, and you build out from there into your locality, into Wales, and then into the wider world. So you're not just looking at a country in Africa or something. You might well end up looking at Nigeria or something, simply because you've got a large population of Nigerian pupils, and you
Mhm.
build from the context of the school out, and they bring in the culture to the school, so you use it, or Polish, or whatever it is, in the school. So if you're going to look at Black history, for example, you use someone like Betty Campbell, who was a famous head teacher in Cardiff, who the rest of the country wouldn't know, but in Cardiff, she's well known. There's a statue to her. So it's that kind of approach. And so the knowledge is not the key. The skills
Mhm.
are the key in authentic contexts, built systematically, and encouraging children into independence. The independence is not working on your own. It's taking responsibility for your learning. It's all
Mhm.
about developing learners.
Okay. Okay, that's very interesting. And as you say, is profoundly different to the rest of the UK. And there's always lots of discussion around sort of a skills-based curriculum, knowledge-based curriculum. And obviously we all have our own leanings. You speak very positively about a skills-based curriculum in Wales, and as well about the kind of the different or the lessened focus on assessment. But just for a moment then, you say there's no SATs, but Welsh children will do GCSEs, won't they?
Yes, there are
Yeah,
yearly assessments,
sure. Yeah,
but they're designed to be diagnostic.
sure. Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
not, when I inspect a school, it's not, I don't look at the results to find out how good the children are.
Okay, that's interesting. Sure, sure. So,
I could now, and there's a big shift away from that. Now, the problem has come. One thing I should say, actually, which is different, is that all children learn Welsh,
of course.
and
Yeah.
they still learn a language on top of that when they get to high school, but
Hmm.
all children are learning Welsh. So that
Okay.
is a significant difference.
That is a significant difference. And to be a teacher in Wales, or at least to be a primary school teacher, am I correct in thinking you have to be able to speak Welsh? Is that
No,
not
you have to be able
true?
to teach Welsh.
Teach Welsh. Okay, wow. Okay, so I lived in Wales for 4 years, in a very Welsh part of Wales as well, Aberystwyth. And I'm afraid I left knowing a few words of Welsh, one of them being araf, because it's
Yeah,
it's
you have to
on.
slow down ever so often on the roads. That's true.
And you do have to slow down a lot more now in Wales because they have 20-mile-an-hour speed limits everywhere.
Yes, there's that as well. But that doesn't really affect the education too much.
No, it doesn't at all. So I'm very glad that I'm not teaching in Wales for that purpose, although I do think it's a beautiful language. But I suppose one of the things I'm interested in is sometimes we can have, I'm just pressing you here just to see what you think, but sometimes we can have quite a romantic sort of vision of a skills-based curriculum. When it comes to outcomes, though, I don't think anyone would deny if we're purely basing it on assessments and then comparing Welsh students with, say, their international Welsh school pupils do seem to have fallen in their performance in things like PISA tests and young people staying on in education post 16. I'm just wondering, yeah, why do you think that might be? Is that down to curriculum and this sort of renewed curriculum for Wales? Is there something else going on? Is it more to do with, I don't know, the nation as a whole? I don't know, something in the kind of something to do with the health or the economy of Wales? I'm just interested or intrigued. Or does it matter? Is the other question.
There's a million things there.
Sorry, yeah, that's a bit
Yeah,
overwhelming, isn't it?
yeah. I think people in Wales are concerned that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think the geopolitical issues around no jobs in the valleys, communities that have been without work for generations, and there are a lot of complex reasons that I don't think I could speak to really. I don't have the knowledge. What the new curriculum hasn't had time to have an impact.
Sure. Okay.
Say new
So when did
curriculum,
it
the
come
Welsh.
in then, Geoff?
It came in. It came in quite a few years ago. It's been around. I couldn't tell you the exact date. Probably
Mm,
2018 or something.
okay.
So it's not brand. It's not called the new curriculum anymore. It's the Welsh
Sure.
curriculum.
It's just, yeah,
But it hasn't filtered into the secondary school
of
yet.
course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And that's the problem, because and it is this is just what I think. Secondary school teachers are not convinced by it.
Okay.
It would be hard to find a secondary school teacher who's on board with the pedagogy I just described in primary schools.
Okay. Oh, that's
If you
interesting. Okay.
if you sat and talked to some children from some of the best primary schools I've seen, they are amazing at 11. They are absolutely stunning. They're knowledgeable because they know how to learn. They're confident, they have the basic skills, they can use them, they can talk about them, they can collaborate together, they can work together, they can disagree, they can agree. It's just a privilege to sit with
Mm.
them and talk with them. But when they go to many high schools, they face a completely different pedagogy, which is a knowledge-based one. And the aim there is to get has been for a long time, how many the percentage of A's to C's.
Of
So
course, in Wales, the GCSEs are not graded numerically like they are now in England. You still have A star to C.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the England has changed again. But yeah, that is a problem that hasn't been solved at all.
Okay. So
So
perhaps a disconnect then between the buy-in from primary colleagues to secondary, and that's perhaps something that hasn't been ironed out.
not at all. No, it's and inspectors now are increasingly looking not at results, they're looking at the pedagogy, the
Hmm.
quality of teaching and learning. And a lot of high schools, which were viewed as good because of the percentage of A's to C's, are coming out with difficult reports because they're now being judged on the quality of teaching and learning in a way they weren't, it doesn't seem, before.
Sure. So in terms of looking at the quality of teaching and learning in, say, secondary schools, would they be judging that against whether they meet those kind of four intentions of the curriculum for Wales, if that's demonstrated through the teaching and learning? Or would they be looking more in depth at, I don't know, lesson sequencing or yeah, I'm just interested because obviously it's only one marker, and of course, results are not the be all and end all. But I suppose one assumes, maybe coming from more of a knowledge-based education focus, that if the teaching and learning is good, then that will translate to results as well. So what are they looking for when they go? Because you're an inspector, am I correct in saying that as well, Geoff?
Yes.
So if you were to go into a secondary school, what would you be looking for to make it a really good lesson, say, or a good school?
Yeah. I'm looking to see whether the children are learning anything. I'm only really concerned with the learning when I go
Sure.
into a classroom,
Mhm.
because the big question is, are the children learning anything? If they're learning the right things, and then is there any group of children not learning as fast as the others? Now, if that's the case, if they are learning and they're learning the right things, and there's no group struggling along while the rest thrive, then whatever the teacher's doing is working because they're learning. So then I work backwards. You don't go in with a model of what a teacher should be doing. You don't say a teacher should do a plenary. Well, maybe a plenary will be a good thing. Maybe it wouldn't in that context. Who knows? You,
Mm.
it's that question. So I'd have to go into the school to be able to answer that question properly. I'm not ducking it. That there are
Sure.
obviously good things like high expectations, management of behavior. There are basics in teaching that you won't get learning unless those are there.
Sure.
But I think that's the expectation in secondary school of acquiring knowledge and covering a syllabus is a different expectation than producing a learner. And
Sure.
as yet, it hasn't been tried out to see whether, if you carried on what the primary school children are doing, if you let those children go and drive on with their motivation and their attitudes and their skills, what sort of GCSEs would you get out of the end? When you came to the content of the GCSE syllabus in year 10 and 11, if you'd really developed those children as learners, the theory is they would go through the roof.
Sure. Sure.
But I don't know of a high school yet that's done that.
Sure.
And it's a very brave head. I don't think the teachers in high school are convinced either.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. It sounds like there would be, and again, I'm not necessarily advocating for this style of educational learning, but near me, there's a very experimental secondary school that delivers all lessons through project-based learning, which I'm not necessarily saying that's what you're suggesting, but very much has a holistic understanding of what it means to get good outcomes, and will certainly be, and will be usually working towards something that's very practical, or that is to demonstrate or to explain to local community members. And it just has a very different philosophy of education to pretty much any other secondary school in the UK. It sounds like that of having ambitious learners and ethical citizens, healthy individuals, enterprising contributors, that it sounds like that kind of model could potentially work with Welsh secondary schools if heads are brave enough to go down that route.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's not just brave, they have to think it's the right way to go.
absolutely.
And some of them
Yeah.
are not convinced that it will produce that.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't think. Otherwise, they'd be doing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know either.
Mhm.
Nobody knows until someone tries to do it.
And the problem is you probably don't want to be the first person, do you? In case it doesn't work out in the way that you would like. It's very, and also you'd have to have brave parents who would be wanting to send their children to to such schools. And I also wonder where the schools being under the control of the local authority, and you don't get the same sort of free schools that you would in England, where there's a lot more autonomy, or even academies where there has been much more autonomy as well. So I don't know whether it would even be possible in Wales to have that kind of very different way of doing education. But then I suppose if there are a very broad sort of measures of outcome, then it could be. Could it just depend on the individual head?
It would depend a lot on the individual head. I think any head who's working towards what the curriculum requires is going to be supported. And
Sure.
I think it's a question of strategy. And I'm working with some heads at the moment who want to do this kind of thing. But the kind of strategy we've been discussing is start with year 7. You've got year 6s who are used to this kind of thing. Take year 7, just in maybe one department, and see what happens.
Sure.
Take them through, build on it, take it through to year 9, see
Mm.
what they're like in year 9, see
Yeah,
if it's worked. You're not messing with their education because you're going to be tracking it.
sure.
Wales has assessments, so
Mm.
it's not that they're just not used in the way that they are in England.
Sure. Yeah.
So as long as you track it and assess it and monitor and evaluate you should be able to, you're not experimenting with children's future.
Sure.
You can really see whether you can build these kind of pupils who, the theory is that they'll be better equipped for
Mm.
whatever life has got in 10 years time. And also it's based on the fact that countries like Finland held their and
Mm.
carried it on into secondary school education, and has ended up with, in the end, pupils that are outperforming British
Mm.
pupils in the UK.
So let's take a segue. And really, this probably should have been one of my first questions because I don't want anyone to think that this next topic is now an adjunct to the rest of the discussion we've been having. But obviously, you are a Christian, you're a Christian teacher, you've been a Christian head teacher, you're still now working with other Christian leaders and leaders that aren't Christians. What would you say then are the opportunities that Christian teachers have in Wales to live out their faith, to even promote the opportunities for learning about Christianity in schools, both kind of formally and informally?
Yeah, I think that I don't know that it's that different from England or Scotland in the fundamentals, in that if you live out a Christian character of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, is probably the most powerful thing you can do in the context. And I think the challenges in Wales, the main challenges in Wales, are the same as in England and Scotland, and I'm sure in other countries as well. The main challenges are children entering the system and in the system with more complex needs
Yeah.
than we've experienced before. Alongside that, certainly in Wales, less money to address the problem, and certainly in terms of staffing. So that's a pressure as well. And then added to that, parents who are increasingly demanding of what they want and expect from a school. So if you put those three things into the mix, then from my point of view, I think being a Christian teacher and living out a Christian life is even more powerful because everybody's under pressure.
Yeah.
So it's more demanding to be a teacher, but you're making more of a difference.
Sure.
When I was a head, probably I could run an okay school and most of my children would be okay. Now you need to run a really good school to
Yeah.
get those children through. When children are arriving, one of the heads I work with in his school, all of the intake that he had were in nappies.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a thing. And so when that happens, you're in a different world, aren't you, really?
Yeah.
And many children are arriving now verbal.
Yeah. Yeah. We see the same in
Yeah.
England.
So
Yeah.
I think in that circumstance, schools, there are basically four institutions that are hitting our society in the front line now,
Yeah.
that know what it's like. NHS, social services, schools, and churches in some areas where the church is connecting with the community. And out of those four, NHS is totally reactive, social services are totally reactive, schools, whilst being reactive, actually can be proactive, and so can churches. The only two big institutions in the front line that I can think of that have that possibility of actually affecting society. Government can't do it. You can't legislate people's well-being. So I think being a Christian teacher in that environment, it is a vocation. I really believe
Yeah.
that. It's not
Yeah.
just can't it's too demanding to be just a job.
Yeah.
But if you do feel this is what God wants you to do in that situation, just being a Christian in that environment with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and all these other things, I think that's the biggest thing. And I'm trying to encourage anybody who thinks they've got this resilience you need to be able to get in there. I think that's the opportunity. It's what Jesus did. He just went straight to in the front line of where people were at. And where can you make a positive influence? There's a really powerful book called Final Year, The Final Year. I've forgotten the author now. Talking about the impact of a year six teacher. Quite dysfunctional family in some senses. It's done in poetry. It's a very easy read, but it's a great read.
Oh,
But it
well,
just,
if you find the author, we'd love to add a link to that in our podcast description.
yeah. So I'm going on here, but
No, not at all. No, it's wonderful to hear. So the opportunities are, as you say, are quite holistic and are very much in essence due to the kind of the dignity of the vocation that God gives that Christians can partner in by seeking to develop and mature young minds, passing on skills and knowledge and being the face of Jesus in places that, as you say, are increasingly challenging. Are there also, so in England, we have opportunities to speak about Jesus in assemblies. In fact, we still have the daily act of collective worship, which is entitled, that is legislatively an entitlement for every student to receive every single day. How does that work in Wales? Do you have the opportunity to give Christian assemblies to invite groups in and talk about Bible stories or to?
yeah, very much. It
Yeah,
does depend on the head teacher.
sure. Yeah,
Some head
yeah.
teachers would be less willing to do that. Other head teachers would be very happy for that. There's still the every day should be a broadly Christian act
Mhm.
of worship, but many schools now don't follow that.
Yeah,
And it's not in any way policed or
no.
enforced really effectively, from my point of view, anyway. But yes, in the curriculum, there's a strong emphasis on diversity,
Yeah, yeah.
the PSE curriculum. But I think for I don't see a problem with that as long as you make the distinction between helping people to understand and the people's lifestyles, which are there, everybody to be in the classroom, and promoting people's lifestyles.
Sure.
I think that's promoting a lifestyle is a different thing and really is not the job of a teacher, I don't think. But as
Yeah.
long as you keep that line quite clear, then
That, I mean, that,
you, sorry. Oh,
no, not at all, Geoff. I was just going to say, obviously, in England, but I do think in Wales as well, I have seen some. some particular resources that have come out of Wales that, again, I would say really does cross the boundary of, so doesn't simply educate or inform, but advocates for allyship with certain ideas. And also, I can't remember exactly, there was one website and I can't remember which one it was called, but it was definitely a Welsh provider of relationships and sex education that, in my opinion, was profoundly inappropriate with some of the detail and the images and the demands made of children that I didn't think should be made of them at all. But I think it's roughly similar to what we've seen in England. And I think I don't quite know what the guidance is like in Wales, and I probably should. But in England, I do feel that the pendulum has swung a little bit back now. I think we are getting to a more sensible point where actually the authorities have realised that many of the materials that were in English schools were drastically inappropriate and were promoting contested ideas, etc. But as you say, now I think the guidance does a better job, not perfect, does a better job of ensuring that less ideological information is in, and that teachers need to be much more circumspect about what sort of line they're taking. So we talked a little bit about opportunities, and you touched again on challenges. Is there anything else in particular that is distinctive to the Welsh context that might be, I don't know, a particular challenge for Christians in education? Because Wales has such a rich Christian heritage. I know when I was at university in Wales, I learned all about the Welsh revivals and how profoundly impactful they were on the valleys. And when you drive through Wales, you see the abundance of little chapels that are still there. Sadly, many of them are not frequented on a Sunday anymore, have been turned into homes. Yeah. Does Christianity still have a place in education today in Wales?
I think in educational terms, it's got a place in the fact that every school, when inspected, is inspected on their spiritual, moral, social, and
Yeah.
cultural development of pupils. And
Mm.
you have to report on that. And there are still church schools, obviously, which are some of the strongest schools in Wales, in the Catholic sector and in the Church of Wales sector. So there's a strong tradition there. So when you go into the history of Wales, you can't help but come across the strong Christian heritage people in all sorts of aspects. So that works for you in Wales.
Yes, no, that's a really good point, because I suppose being the content of the curriculum being so context and location dependent could be a real kind of, yeah, it could be something very powerful looking at the evangelical awakenings. And yeah, that I assume that many schools would touch upon that in history or in RE.
Not necessarily. It depends. Each school has got its own curriculum.
Okay.
So
I imagine that many Christian teachers or Christian heads would be thinking, oh, okay. I'm sure they've already thought about this. They don't need me to suggest that, but that would be a wonderful way to incorporate Welsh history.
well, it's a very important part of
Yeah,
Welsh culture. We still sing a hymn in a rugby international.
absolutely. Yeah, bread of heaven.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're meaning. Oh, Geoff, because you're not actually a Welshman by birth, though, are you?
No.
No, okay. But do you support, sorry, a bit of a segue, but do you support Wales in rugby?
I came here when I was 11 and I thought I was British and discovered I was English.
Yeah.
So I became fiercely English. But the good thing about my fiercely English background, playing rugby and everything, even though England got hammered at that time, Wales is still my second team.
Excellent. I think my husband and I would say, again, sorry, another segue, that Wales is our second team because we have fond memories of watching rugby. In fact, we were in Wales when England won the World Cup in, was it 2003? And we were watching with a load of Welsh mates when Johnny, what's his name, did his drop
Wilkinson.
kick. Wilkinson did his drop kick, and we won the match in the World Cup. But anyway, that being said, when it comes to Wales, so having lived in Wales, I do know that there's perhaps a slight nervousness or a slight suspicion in some parts of Wales and outsiders. So, what encouragement would you give to perhaps those that are coming out from outside of Wales to pursuing a career in education in Wales? Would we be welcomed with open arms? Would our inability to pronounce Welsh place names put us at an immediate disadvantage? Or would you say that actually, do you know what? We're not so parochial or so nationalistic, because one of the things that I noted at university was there was a real division between Welsh students and English students, including had their own halls of residence, had their own lectures in Welsh, had their own Christian union even in Wales. Yeah, so would English or Scottish or other nationalities be welcome?
I think Celtic nations would find it easier. There's a strong affinity between Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales when it comes to sporting type events. I think it depends where you go. If you go to a cosmopolitan city like Cardiff, it's
Yeah,
multinational.
sure.
It's nobody would know. If you went to some parts of Wales, which are mostly Welsh speaking, then obviously you'd stand out because you're not speaking Welsh. So it does depend. The majority of Wales, you'd be fine. Fine. It's not a deal.
Oh,
I
no.
think I think if it's not, there are some people who really do learn from England, but I wish the two would learn from one another. They're too isolated. I initially inspected in England for about 10 years, and I learned so much from looking at the way England were doing things. And I think it's a shame if we don't learn from one another a bit more. I think there are things in the Welsh curriculum that could benefit England, and I think vice versa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perhaps a more humble attitude from all of us would be better. So finally, Geoff, then, just thinking, you speak to a lot of particularly leaders, head teachers, Southern Christians, and I know in your church in Cardiff you have a lot of Christian teachers from what I hear. What would you say, how can we be praying for and supporting Welsh teachers over in the other devolved nations? What can we be particularly committing to God in prayer? What are the greatest needs at the moment?
Yeah, I thought about this. I think, to be honest, it's the same as for the other teachers. There's nothing, the overriding issues are far more significant than any particular Welsh thing. So,
Sure.
if you came across the border as an NQT in Wales, yes, the curriculum will look different, but basically you'll need resilience to deal with the pressures that people are under on this
Mm,
front line, and pray that they'd be able to regulate. I think I spend an awful lot of my time trying to get teachers and leaders to regulate, because they spend all their time getting dysregulated pupils and parents to regulate. And that's really demanding, but then they don't bother to regulate themselves.
yeah, yeah.
And the last thing you want is there's only one thing worse than a dysregulated pupil, which
Mm,
is a dysregulated teacher dealing with a dysregulated
yeah,
pupil.
yeah,
And I've been there,
yeah,
so I'm speaking from experience.
yeah.
And I think pray that they would be able to keep such a important job. I can't think of a job more important in our society right now. I can
Mm,
think of jobs as important. I can't think of a job that has more importance. We only need to see what happened with COVID to see how
yeah,
much difference schools now make in our society. But to stick it is really hard work now.
yeah.
So pray they'd be able to regulate and keep the job in its box and
Mm,
deal with the aggressive parent or whatever it is, or the dysregulated child, and just cope with it, that
mm,
situation. And if they can regulate, my big question is this sustainable? And somehow it's really hard. You've got to, it's pejorative, but they've got to make it sustainable.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really solemn point there you've made, Geoff. And I think, again, something that we, as you already rightly said, is not just impacting Welsh teachers, but yeah, apparently about 10% of the teaching workforce leave each year. And we know that particularly in secondary, recruitment is not what it should be. I think primary, at least in England, is not too bad, but I know secondary schools, they're not training enough teachers. They just don't get enough applicants to train. And then when they do get newly qualified or early career teachers, as we call them now in England, the first 5 years are absolutely pivotal. And a large proportion will leave in the first 5 years. So I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, pray for resilience. And please do pray for us as well in England and in Scotland. Absolutely, resilience is needed. And that's why Christian teachers don't do this alone. You need your church family. You need a community around you to support you and pray with you and pray for you and to value the missional work you're doing and the vocation you have chosen, because it does glorify God and it does impact young lives, as Geoff rightly said. So yeah, thank you ever so much, Geoff. Pray that you'll be blessed in your work with teachers and in education and with young people. I know today you went into school and were working with some 7-year-olds and 10-year-olds, so it's wonderful that you're still honouring God in schools on the front line. So thank you so much for all you do.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me.